Hello and good afternoon, good morning, whatever time of day you are tuning in here today. This is the Dr. Lake Show. I'm really pleased to be here once again today. Sitting with me, I have Sandra Sova, who is going to be talking with us today, and a continuation of the conversation around self-regulation and how we can change our lives in spite of circumstances we have. And as well, I have Dylan Soriano-Powling. Dylan, hi.
Hello.
Hi, how you doing?
Good. How are you ladies doing?
Very, very good.
Super excellent.
Yes, and
Awesome.
you know, just to introduce you, Sandra, we've known each other for a while, and I know that we've done radio at local radio here at CHLY. And that's really how you got launched. There's a number of things that happened, but I'd like to give a little bit of background for people who are just listening for the first time, and we're meeting you for the first time here. I know that you've gone through a lot of adversities, and the reason I find your story particularly interesting is because I know that we use adversity as often a reason that we can't be happy or that we can't feel content within our lives. And one of the things I found really impressive about your journey has been that you have had adversity and you have had to face a lot of difficult situations, and yet you've made some really amazing transformations that I can see. Been in the last few years. And I'd like to talk to people, have people know about that a little bit. Just to give a bit of background, you were diagnosed at 8 years of age with
Rheumatoid arthritis.
rheumatoid arthritis.
Yeah, that's an inflammatory arthritis. People often mistakenly hear the word arthritis and they think that that's only a condition of people that are quite advanced at age. But no, I was 8 years old.
Yeah, that's amazingly young.
Yeah.
I can't even imagine how a child would receive that kind of information, especially when you want to play and be part of everything with other kids, right? And so that must have been huge. But you, in spite of that, you still managed to get yourself into fairly prominent positions in the workplace. You were working, you mentioned part of these larger organizations and companies. You were creating policy procedure, you were hiring, you were doing interviews. So you played a really prominent role in sort of the management of.
Yeah, I was the customer service and call center manager for large consumer-based corporations, and that went everything from having a staff of about 30 people who I would be responsible for, and also be responsible for those call numbers and the answer time and the abandon rate. And so it was a great job, but a very stressful job. Yeah.
Yeah. So you toughed it out. I'm taking it.
Yeah.
Because I'm going, it's hard enough doing a job that has inherent stress, but then on top of it, you have a physical condition you're trying to manage. And, at least in my impression, and I'm not sure about what people know or the public knows about rheumatic arthritis, I've always had the impression it's considerably more debilitating. And, I know there's been progress in terms of treatment, but I just know of people that have been completely debilitated by it, that physically, even their movements, fine coordinated movements, even at one time it caused deformity. And
it still does. I mean, I'm very fortunate that most of it was isolated to just one area, one joint, one of my knees. But the thing with rheumatoid arthritis is that it's an inflammatory condition, and it affects more than just the joint and the bone. It affects you systemically throughout your entire system and can have impact on your organs, and is very taxing. Not just the disease, but a lot of the medications make me more prone to heart attack or stroke or blood clots. And so you have to, it's a pretty serious disease. I'm lucky I didn't have a lot of the deformity issues, but it is Yeah, it's like I said, it's systemic. It affects more than just the joints.
And it's not something you just ignore, right? You go,
No.
"Oh, okay, I can kind of pretend it doesn't exist. It's an existence that you're living with
constant,
on a daily basis. And from my understanding, then you were, I don't know what the term is, but you were in a position where you had to step back from all work engagement.
Yeah, and so that was, Paula, that was actually really, really difficult for me to get to a place where I was able to do that. Both my rheumatologist and my GP had, for about 2 or 3 years, been recommending that I stop work. It was finally when I was in my GP's office that over and over again I would show up there and I was just like, I was broken, I was exhausted. And I decided that I would take that medical leave because at that point I had dedicated, with having a chronic illness, that was very active disease activity. All I was doing was getting up and pushing myself in order to show up for that job. Wow. And it consumed my life. And then when I finally did take the leave, I was it was a failure. It felt like a failure that I couldn't do it. Because one of the things, just to back up, one of the things that did make me so successful in the roles in the corporate world was from a very early age, mentioning that I was diagnosed at 8 years old. I learned to deal with it. I learned to deal with things. I learned to push through. And so I would always do that. But it's a double-edged sword. Sometimes that was really good for my employer.
Sure.
My bosses always loved the dedication that I did, but that was not really good for me as an individual.
Yeah.
And so, working yourself to the absolute breaking point is, it actually turned out to be quite a damaging situation. But then when I finally did, I physically could no longer do it anymore. I had to take that leave.
Yeah. It's interesting that whole idea because our culture really pushes for push through over, and our self-esteem is actually tied to our productivity.
Yep.
At least in our society. So I can completely understand that would have been a huge mind shift for you, because it sounds like you really adopted that push through, ignore. And not everybody does that, just to say,
No, and I also identified very positively with my career. I was proud of the work that I had done and the advancements that I had made. I was feeling in a good place about it. So it was a tough one.
Yeah. All the grief and sense of identity, because our identity gets tied up in the work that we're doing, right?
Yeah, for sure.
And then you got this other blow, unexpected. I don't know how long after that happened, you ended up getting diagnosed with breast cancer.
Absolutely. Yeah. I finally, so we had moved all of the corporate work was over in Vancouver. So when we moved finally back to Vancouver Island, I was like, okay, I am finally going to de-stress. I won't have that big commute anymore. I'll be closer to family, thinking at the time that would be good. And all of this kind of stuff, and you just recover. I mean, moving for anyone is exhausting, right?
Yeah,
but when you've got a chronic condition on top of that. So we landed on October 31st in 2012. And then December of the following year in 2013, I was diagnosed with breast cancer.
Dear Lord.
So it was totally unexpected, of course. I mean, who would expect something like that? But the next year was all based on treatments and surgeries and chemotherapy and all that. But what they don't tell you when you go through a cancer experience is that after your treatment is over, your journey is not over. You're actually then entering a really, really tough phase. And it took me 3 full years after treatment was completed before I could even get my head above water and catch my breath.
Wow.
And then that's when I went into a caregiving role for my parents.
Oh, yes.
So I'm also
bounding with energy.
That's right. That's right.
Cancer.
So,
wow.
and again, still carrying forth that I can do it. I can be there for others. And I really embraced that. I embraced that again after my, when I started being a caregiver for my parents. Things started to get really, really crazy for me on a stress level. Stress is something that anyone with an autoimmune condition can tell you absolutely that if you are exposed to a lot of stress, your disease activity will increase. Your condition will be exacerbated by that. And so being in that situation, I started to get sick again, in different ways though.
Yes.
And I started to really get a lot of physical trauma in my body. My body just was not functioning anymore in a lot of ways. And that was the wake up call. That was something sort of clicked at that time. And I then made a decision to reinvent my life and to be what I say all the time on my radio show and my podcast is to be in the driver's seat for my health and wellness.
Yes.
And I got fed up enough that I have been through a lot and challenging through, and I wasn't willing to give away my health, my happiness, my vitality, my life to other situations. I needed to take control. And that was, about, I've been doing the radio show for 2.5 years. It was just kind of, so about 3 years ago, I decided to make some real changes. And I talk about how, it's an interesting story. It is my story, having rheumatoid arthritis and going through breast cancer and stuff like that. But it is never a poor me, oh, what's happened to you story. Yeah. It was those two things have ended up being the absolute biggest gifts in my entire life, because after going through that, it allowed me to really look at this life that I had through a different lens and to value it so much more. And for the very first time, to actually embrace self-care and to make myself the priority. Very, very foreign from what I had ever done. Wow. I was not used to that.
That's just amazing. My experience working with a lot of different people is, we always have this nice phrase, adversity can make you stronger. And I think, but I revised that one. I think adversity can make you stronger, but may not necessarily make you stronger, because it really depends on how you deal with it. Mm-hmm. And I see people get stuck, and I have great compassion for how that can happen, because I think all of us have the capacity to get stuck. But especially with pain, that breaking out of that concept that I have no life now that I have these conditions, I have no choice because of this situation, how easy it is to get completely trapped. And I think, in understanding the brain, that's what happens. Mm-hmm. You could have stayed trapped. Mm-hmm. You could have, right? I often ask people when coaches is what I've been asking when I did my radio show. When do people change? When the pain of staying the same is worse than the pain of changing, because there is pain involved in change to some degree. I use the phrase a lot, you got to do the work, and it is work. Yeah. It doesn't just naturally happen, change. But that is, if you want a different result, you have to make the changes, and we have to be willing to do that. And for me, making really small changes over the course of time, and I would start in one area and try to. So at first, I started with the stress component, and then there was a lot of looking at how I was reacting to situations. So the stressful situation that I was in, I couldn't necessarily change or remove myself to that, but what could I do? What was the one thing that I could control? It was my response to that, and that was a whole learning process, a discovery process, breaking of habits, learning new techniques, learning different ways. And you have to be willing to do it, because it is easy to follow the old patterns. Easy.
It's
That's a non-effortful approach.
yeah,
Is just do what you've always been doing, right? Yeah.
yeah, but it was yeah, so making some changes and just being a lot of the things like that really helped with a lot of the physical changes that I've made. So in the past year and a half, I finally decided to address my weight issue. I have been overweight all of my life, and when doing the radio show, I had the opportunity to interview some of the top research scientists in Canada in the field of arthritis and rheumatology, and sitting across from this top research scientist in Canada who actually used to be my rheumatologist when I was in Vancouver, and hear her say and describe that the stress of your heart and the risk of heart attack and a shortened lifespan just from having arthritis, and then on top of that being overweight, and the amount of changes that that could make it's like you kind of always know this, but it was another one of my wake up, pay attention.
Yeah.
And one of the other things, one of the characteristics that I have that sometimes it's good and sometimes it's not, is I am stubborn. And so right there in that chair, sitting across from her, just like you and I are right now, I am going to do this because I can't sit here and pretend that it is not going to impact my life. So each and every time with the changes, for me, it has started with absolutely deciding and making that choice, and then being stubborn and following through and being consistent, and then finding you need the supports around you to do that. You can it's not something
It's
that you
not
can
in
do in
isolation.
isolation.
No.
No.
One thing that I want to really, I'm trying to draw out certain aspects of that experience because I think it's an example of how so often we want our circumstance to change. And don't get me wrong. If we can, I say go to it. Change your circumstance. If it's one that you're not fulfilled with and it's within your capacity to change it, that's the beauty of agency, is we can make those decisions. But this is one of those situations where you were not changing and focusing on getting rid of rheumatoid arthritis, or I'm going to eliminate the stress of having to manage parents. It was an inward change. It was something that happened in you that allowed you to experience life in a dramatically different way without even necessarily a recognition that I'd love the serenity prayer, grant me the serenity to accept the things that to change the things I can change, and the courage to change the things that I can change, and the ability to accept the things I cannot, and the wisdom to know the difference. And I think that is, for me, an example. And, one thing I do encounter often is people who struggle with their symptoms, it might be pain or something chronic, is they are really good at arguing for their limitations, for what they
Yes.
can't do. And they will argue till they're red in the face and tell you what they can't do. But not much time is spent reorienting it. It's to what you can do and how that can change your life. So I just want to say that is what I'm most impressed with, is the fact that you changed internally.
Yeah, it is an internal change, and it's become something that I'm fiercely protective of now.
Yeah.
Before, I would really just lead my life in response to what was going on around me, whether that be, a work situation or other people's demands or needs. I was always be in response mode. Now, again, I'm in the driver's seat. I decide. I make those decisions. And the thing about having a chronic illness, a lot of what I talk about on my show and my podcast is the upside of that. The coping ways that you can cope and the things. But that's not to take away that pain. It sucks. It's hard. It's not easy.
Yeah.
But if I made a decision really early on this, even before I transformed and reinvented myself, I made the decision very early on that having pain or discomfort was not going to dictate how my day would be.
Yeah.
Would not affect my mood or my things, because the fact of the matter is, if I let having pain dictate how my day was going to be, I would have a crappy day every single day.
Yeah.
And again, that's not something that doesn't fuel me. That doesn't feed me. It's the antithesis of what I want to do. So it's a choice, and it's a choice you make over and over again.
There was, I remember saying that energy flows where attention goes, and so wherever we put our attention in our life is where we end up getting back. Because what I have seen with you is that your actual, once you did change and work on changing what was happening inside of you, you also started to experience a lot more things changing outside of you.
Yes.
And I think that's a principle in my mind, that we need. That's the core focus we need to be spending time with. So Dylan, I don't know if you want to share anything.
I heard this quote the other day. It was something like, "It's hard to be unhealthy, but it's also hard to keep fit. It's hard to be financially responsible, but it's also hard to be broke." And you kind of just have to choose your hards in this life.
Yeah.
I like that.
I know it's kind of cynical, but
I like that.
that totally came into my mind, because it's just the truth. Either way, you're going to be dealing with adversity. So to hear that, you saw that path in front of you, that sort of fork in the road, and
definitely.
you chose the one that was probably harder to do, but of course is going to make you live a more fulfilling life, I think. Be better to people. So that's awesome, because I've met so many people dealing with chronic pain, and it just looms over them.
It looms over
their
them.
whole demeanor, revolves around the pain
and
that they feel.
That's all that they know even how to talk about and focus on. And I say this with compassion, because I do not in any shape or form.
I don't blame them.
Absolutely. I understand how we can all get caught in it. And in some cases it might be pain. In other cases it might be, we talk always about the hurt we have from what's been done to us. And I mean, we all can fall into this place. The question isn't whether you've fallen, just knowing that you don't have to stay there. And that's really the message I want people to get, is that you can have all these things, and you might even feel stuck, and you might feel like that's the only thing that exists in your life, and it's destroying it. But I think that's the messages of hope that say that you can actually experience some things and adversities and still enjoy life and still get joy out of life. So I think the question people would wonder, firstly, I just want to acknowledge that you have since started a podcast, which you've mentioned. What is the name of your podcast?
Chronically Driven.
Chronically Driven. You've also, you continued with your local radio. But I think people would like to know how, what did you do? What were some of the things that you found were helpful as you moved in this direction?
Well, part of it is recognizing where I wanted to make change, and then taking responsibility, and kind of almost a lot of the way I approach things, I sort of reverse engineer it. What do I want the outcome to be? Well, how am I going to get there? And a lot of things with the way that I would, I had to do a lot of work with setting boundaries, because if I'm going to say, all right, so I'm recognizing that stress is a challenge for me, not just irritates me, but it has actual physical repercussions. If I know that that's true, and I want to make a difference, so what are some of the tools that I can do? And breaking those patterns and those habits. True confession time, I used to spend way too much time. If something would happen, and we'll just use a benign circumstance to relate, to draw the picture. Let's say a road rage traffic. Someone cuts you off in traffic. Well, whatever would happen in my life, I would take that and I would internalize it and I would think about it and I would talk about it and I would talk about how that was not right. And I would spend so much time living with whatever the ick situation was, that over time, and then you have a lot of those, I would end up getting sick. So finding some changes, finding some ways to do it. So a lot of it is setting boundaries. And if you're someone who is always a people pleaser, or that you're always looking for approval, even if you don't consciously know you're looking for approval, if you do the work, you figure out that's why you're behaving that way. Setting boundaries is not easy. That's hard. That takes a skill.
And let alone that, I certainly can appreciate, I come from an Italian family, and setting boundaries was hard because, being a good person means that you please the family. And if you're not pleasing the family, then maybe that means you're a bad person. And so these are internal messages that we may or may not be conscious of. But on top of it, it's that much harder when you're dealing with ailing parents because there is a realistic need. It's not just in their heads, but I could see it being really challenging for some people to even put themselves in a place of saying it's okay for me to set boundaries. And I'm wondering, how did you go from that? How did you do that?
So a few things. I mean, there's never the one silver bullet. There's never the one sort of thing. So first is being aware. We talk about having self-awareness, being aware of the situation, and finding tools and things that I could do in the moment to break that negative cycle of ruminating over things and assigning blame for my bad day onto someone else.
Right.
First and foremost, when this was at its peak, I made a wonderful discovery after talking to my doctor about at the breaking point and with stress, and their recommendation was antidepressants. It's like, well, I wasn't depressed.
Right.
So I sought out a different way, a natural way, and that's when I discovered using essential oils. So essential oils have become a huge part of my overall health, wellness, and well-being, because that is something that I could take, and I could literally take a bottle of essential oil, which I actually have one right here, and just take the cap off and breathe in those natural plant aromas. They go, when you inhale an essential oil and plant essence, you breathe it through and it goes past it goes into the limbic portion of your brain. And that's where decision making, that's where our fight or flight, that's where that is. So I would find the certain oils and the blends that would work to take me from a 9 rage, anger, whatever it was, hurt, whatever that emotion was. I would use essential oils to help break through that cycle quickly so that I could then do the thought process that I want to do. Because when you're in a heightened state of, whether it's anxiety, anger, whatever it is, you can't always think your way through those things. And you can't just, so that helps me flip.
Part of the brain gets shut down. And I think that's the biggest challenge. People are trying to solve a problem from that state. And the first thing you need to do is change your state so that you can actually think about how you're going to deal with the problem.
And so there's the changing your state. That is exactly it. Making a change quick and fast.
Yeah.
The other things, then I started to add on exercise.
Yeah.
And to that, music. In and of itself, great, but having a go-to playlist that you can turn on, it's just like that it changes it does change your state.
Oh,
and
huge.
working out. I mentioned I did weight loss, but aside from the last 3 years, I've led a pretty much sedentary lifestyle. And I bought into the fact that, well, I had rheumatoid arthritis. I can't be expected to work out and move, and it hurts. And so, that's not for me. But now that is for me. I love it. It's my, so by changing your state, doing things for you. And then, you know what? Sometimes you just got to let stuff go. Pick your battles. Sometimes you don't need to be right. You don't need to win, what I need to do, where my process is, I need to protect myself. I need to not
Yes.
get into a self state, and I'm not responsible for other people and how they feel and what they do. I'm responsible for me, and wanting to do that. And there's meditation, and there's mindfulness, there's gratitude. Having, and when I don't think it's possible to be in a straight state of gratitude and self-pity, or gratitude and anger. So having those as your touchstones, and those things that you can go to, and again, being like fiercely protective of that, because the self-worth component finally clicked in.
Which is amazing.
And
is amazing.
That's,
and I think at the core, I always see, I've always mentioned that's my MO probably, is that your relationship with yourself is number one. And I think, think of, someone that you care about. It could be your dog, it could be your child, it could be, and when you value them, you put time into them. And because it's in that valuing that you want them to be well. And how often we don't think of ourselves. So if we don't value self, then why would we care for self when there's no value? And so but the one thing I do hear is that you started to put time into yourself. This wasn't like, because I think how often do we get so stressed and caught up? And I even with my knowledge of how important it is to take time, sometimes through adversity. I recently lost my parents, as you know, and that went out the door. The time, reserving that time for self felt like there was no time for that. And looking back now, I'm going, well, how did I get there when I actually knew not to get there? And which shows me you can still get there, even though you think you have it figured out, how vulnerable we are to losing self again, right? And so in your case, it was like finding self, really.
And part of it, I was thinking the other day, someone was asking me, well, how did the radio show come about, and what are you doing with the podcast? And in a small way, it's my accountability piece.
Yeah.
Because that's what I talk about. I bring in people, and we do just like this. We interview and we talk about our health and wellness and our importance of it. And when I'm helping someone who is sort of in a place where, and I help and I deal with a lot of my audience and whatnot are people in the chronic illness community, because that's sort of the niche. I do talk a lot about that. And you talked about thinking about someone who you value and why that isn't yourself.
Yeah.
And I'll often say to someone, take the perspective of, would you say that? Would you use that sort of self-talk, or would you be that denying of things for your very best friend? What would you tell your very best friend? Wouldn't you want better for her?
Yeah.
And we've got a funny thing in our society where we don't reward that sort of stuff. Self-care is not selfish, right? I mean,
I know I just think that somewhere in there, and maybe we get caught up with kids. We see them more vulnerable than us, and other people more, and then that we make those as reasons. Whatever excuses we make, we say, I don't have time. This is more important, and even I can tell you, there's a huge resistance to it. I met with Lee Poulos on a regular basis, a psychologist in Vancouver, and one of the things he said, and I actually kind of believe this, that we sometimes draw from a resource when we're ready to.
Yes.
When the student is ready, the teacher appears. And
I believe that.
I do believe that. I've had things, I remember books I've had on my shelf that I haven't looked at. And then suddenly I'll go, now's the time. Or, so there's,
I'm totally a believer of that. I also have been working on my spiritual side and my connection to energy and all of that stuff. It really fascinates me, and I believe that. Speaking of books, one of the pivotal things that happened for me in my healing journey, it's when I was at my lowest point, I actually went out and sought some therapy. I went to a local walk-in crisis counseling center because I needed some help.
Yeah.
And after some sessions, the counselor that I was seeing recommended this book to me. It's by Gabor
Yes.
Mate, and it's called When the Body Says No,
Yes.
the Cost of Hidden Stress.
Yes.
And I devoured that book. It was difficult to
Yeah.
read some of those things, and it was difficult to hear. And it's not that it's not about blaming, well, you're causing this on yourself.
No,
It's
for
like,
sure.
okay, and it looks at a lot of the things of your family of origin and your early years and dealing with how you're responding to things now. Well, maybe that's because there were needs unmet when you were a younger person,
Yeah.
and all of that stuff. And so that was it was validation, because I always knew that stress was making me sick.
Yes.
But
Yeah.
to read through that book and to see the science behind it as well,
Yeah.
and the
Yeah.
validation. And then that made me more fiercely protective of
Yeah.
protecting myself and wanting to lead a thriving, empowered life.
Yeah.
And
I think Gabor Mate is. I like Gabor Mate. I know that, in a way, it mirrors in our culture how we have learned to even disregard the body as a messenger, and because it really does speak. It says no before we can say no consciously,
Yes.
and yet we can override it until you get to a point where it's screaming at you and you're debilitated at that point. And then suddenly you go, oh, now I have no choice. I have to set a boundary.
Yeah,
So,
and like
yeah.
if I was just reviewing it again before coming in and going, yeah, that's right. And I was saying, like, if we ignore the emotional signals that are trying to tell us to pay attention to something, then that's likely going to manifest in a physical one.
Yeah.
And being able to recognize that, and it's like and part of the difference of how I handle things now as how I used to. Bad stuff still happens.
Yeah.
Stuff still gets crazy. And I don't say, oh, well, I'm going to grab an oil and this doesn't exist and I'm fine. No, I allow myself to feel it, because if you do not
Yeah.
feel that emotion, suppressing and sort of being in denial for yourself or your situation, I think is equally damaging.
Equally.
So figure it out, allow yourself to feel whatever it is that you're feeling. Just decide and choose if that's not where you want to stay. If that's where you want to stay, if you want to, some people really love the drama.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
it's exciting.
yeah, it can be. So but making that choice to want something else, and keeping to move forward.
Yeah.
And it's it's never too late within your life. It's never too early to start on good mental health practices, and it's also never too late.
Never too late.
I mean, I would never 3 years ago have thought that I would be in the best shape physically and emotionally that of my life. I didn't even realize it would be possible.
Yeah. And that is the part that most I see is so poignant for me, because in part of my job it is to help people change and help them reach that point of change. But I do find that a lot of the things we tell ourselves, this is something that I think is natural. Because we're not talking about unnatural processes. I think it's natural to become negative. It's where our brain tends to go, and how often we say things like, I'm too old. I've been like this all my life. What are this is who I am. What are the chances? So, we can go through lists of beliefs that solidify and reinforce us to stay exactly where we are. And, the change of a thought pattern and a belief, and, especially body says no, I'm imagining it started to change the way you started to listen to things, even your body and what it was telling you, right?
Yeah. Yeah, it's all how whatever comes to us in our life, we actually give away a lot of our power that we have to be able to choose and to decide how we're going to respond to things.
Yes, we do.
And it's it is possible to make those changes, and the rewards are amazing. Like once to I always heard they would always say that, oh, well, exercise is going to make you feel better and you're actually going to have the energy and all this kind of stuff. Well, I'm now actually one of those people that say
I
that
know,
too,
I
because
know.
when you live it and you the physical activity component, I think, is so crucial that no matter what, no matter how much pain a person may be in, and I'm speaking now to the chronic illness community and people that have chronic pain, you do not have to go to the gym. You don't have to be a superhero. You do what you
No.
can with what you've got. And even it's the consistency, and it's blessing your body with movement and water and nutrition, and you'd be surprised what can happen when you start making little
Well,
changes.
regardless of pain, there's what you lose it if you don't use it. And that's a fact. And as we age, our mobility, I noticed, as someone who's been always into fitness for myself, as the years went on, I started running, and my body was tightening up. Like I could do this, but suddenly I can't do this. And I realized, my Lord, this is, we need to treat the body as an organism that needs to be worked. It's like the same way we need to work our brain is the way we work our body. And it's not about whether you have a disability. It's keeping your body in the best form you can with the condition, within the parameters of the condition that exists, that it still maximizes, it still enhances performance, right? Yeah. So you've come a long way. I know it's not always easy for people to make that decision, and and how, I don't know if in the work you've been doing in interviews, have you ever encountered people who will say, "Yeah, but I can't," or have you run into
Oh yeah, I mean,
yeah,
and that's been a whole, again, consciously choosing to, even something as simple as my Instagram feed or something. I don't follow, I don't want to consume that kind of stuff because there is so much of that out there, that, that's, I'll never get any better, and, having to prove how sick I am. And it's like,
yeah,
there is a lot of that out there. I think that when someone is ready to make that change, it will happen. It's like kind of, I don't know, like trying to convince someone on politics or something. Their
yeah,
beliefs are their beliefs.
yeah,
And for me, it was a series of events that happened that I finally was like, enough is enough.
yeah.
And yeah, I mean, but little small changes, if you can get someone to be interested, to want to, one of the things that I help people a lot with is sleep, with the oils, because that's another one of my biggest wins. I used to be so dependent on prescription medication
Wow.
for
Have you eliminated that?
oh yeah,
Or?
yeah.
Wow.
So I love natural and holistic medicine, but I also love the mainstream medicine, because I do need that
Yeah,
for
of course.
pain
Of
management, to
course.
manage my disease activity. But in the last 3 years, I have been moving forward and basically finding better ways for what I call taking medications for lifestyle problems, such as sleep issues and anxiety or anxiousness or stuff like that. I was dealing with, I was popping pills under my tongue when things would get stressful. I was dependent on sleeping pills for probably 10 years. And so it's all with all the, after I went through chemotherapy, I had such a vile reaction. I'm like, all these
Of
toxins
course.
and these
Of
medicines,
course.
it
Of
makes me
course.
ugh. So I've made the changes over that. And that's what I like to help people with. It's like, okay, well, what if you could make a change with
Yeah.
that? And over time, I like to think of our bodies as like we're our own ecosystem. Like, think of
Yeah.
your body as the planet, and look at what over pollution over time, what it does to
Yeah.
our earth.
Yeah.
Well, we need to be protective of that.
Absolutely.
So even if someone they're in a mindset of, I can't do this, it's too hard, it's difficult. Well, where is an area where you'd like to make some change? Where is something? And once you start having successes in doing something like that, it's like the domino effect or the corridor effect.
Yes.
And I get pretty passionate about it because I know I cannot be the only woman in her mid 50s that is struggling and also, self-medicating and doing this and feeling that and going to her doctor and they're saying their solutions. How about another prescription? Yeah. How about something else? Because that's the only tools they have. Yeah. Well, we have more tools. Yeah. I'm a huge fan of doing the work and therapy and all of the different things that we can do if we choose and decide. It is up to us. So don't give that power away.
Yeah. I think it is a commitment and it's also a commitment without an end point because it's a lifestyle change. Mm-hmm. It's not I reach my goal and then I'm done. It's a way of life and you incorporate it and it might take more time, but my guess is that you would never change it. That it's time well spent. It's not time that you go, dear God, I have to put in time.
It becomes almost like a new healthy addiction, it's because you want to seek that out. I mean, who doesn't want to feel better more often?
Yeah. Oh,
we all do.
Incredibly. Yeah. Yeah. So I think the other piece that we didn't talk about was, what happens as you change and how do people deal with the change? One of the things I find that is one of the hardest things about us when we change personally is the reactions of the people around us. It's not uncommon when we change there's a saying that families, and it could be organizations, but in this case families, seek out homeostasis. They like things to be the way they were. And when things were the way because it worked for them. And even if it was a dysfunctional dynamic, mm-hmm. they're still comfortable in that dysfunctional dynamic. How did you, and because you were still taking care of your mom and your dad in that mix, and I'm sure their needs were high, mm-hmm. How did you negotiate? Because I think that's something we all struggle with, is if I stop doing this, if I stop playing this role, people are going to reject me, they're going to judge me, they're going to call me selfish. Mm-hmm. How did you negotiate that?
The first thing that comes to mind with that question is saying that I had to be brave. I had to be willing to get a response that I wouldn't like. And, when someone makes a bunch of changes, positive or otherwise, the people around them, either some are going to be supportive, like, yes. If you have an amazing spouse like I do, yes. that's, they encouraging yes, and all that kind of stuff. Yeah. But others, for whatever reason, relationships do change. Right. And there's a lot of it too, I think, is back to the energy. I think that as the way that I show up for any conversation, whether it be in person or on a video call or on the phone, I think my energy now is way different than it was 3 years ago.
Oh, I can say it. I can vouch for that. I mean, over the years, I've seen huge changes and been amazingly, surprised to see how big they've been.
And so with that, relationships will change. And, I'm attracting a different type of people with different interests and things. Yes. And your habits change and your circle yes. can change. And though with negotiating and figuring out how to reframe a relationship that you are in, like in a caregiving role, a lot of that, again, it was learning the skill and shedding the triggers of feeling that you need to be in a certain way. There's a wonderful, fantastic caregiving coach here in Nanaimo, Saskia DeQuosnit.
Oh my.
And she did the last year did a caregiver symposium at the golf course, and I was able to be on the speakers panel talking about caregiving with my dad. And So with some of the tools and things that I learned from her, it's just to recheck yourself and to let you know that the person who is in a caregiving role, who is your number, you are still the most important person. The same, you have to take care of yourself first. You cannot, and so it's just renegotiating, and it's standing up, it's being brave. Part of it is saying, if if you ruffle some feathers, okay. And then what tends to happen, at least in our dynamic,
Yeah.
it just blows over and everything's back to the reset. And so now I'm taking it back and I'm going, wow, I used to let whatever stuff bother me so much when everyone else just moves on. So why was I owning that?
Well, we have levels of conscientiousness. And I also think women are more geared towards taking on the role of harmonizing relationships and being responsible for them. I don't know what your thoughts are, Dylan, because my experience has been, and you have a specific relationship with your family, but is that men have been, I come from a Italian culture, so there's been a lot more right given to, pursue your career, do what you need to do. And women have, in again, from my culture, relegated to the role of caretaking, and to be someone that doesn't take on that role would be looked upon in a more negative light.
Yeah, possibly. I think maybe more with the older generations.
Yes.
And this might just be like my opinion, but like I look at the world right now and I think women like make it turn around. So
Well, you're a unique breed.
yeah.
No,
But I think
yeah.
it's changing. Like there's more. It's still very asymmetrical, the roles of men and women, I think. But
Well, it comes down to
it's
how,
symmetrical in the value, and definitely now more and more we're seeing, of course, like women go into whatever career they want to go into. And I know quite a few men who are in the position of like a stay-at-home dad now, that are in my age,
I
and
see
it's
more
not
of that,
like a
definitely.
taboo or something they're
No,
ashamed of or anything like this.
no, but I've
It was
also, sorry, go ahead.
Oh yeah, it was just more appropriate based
Right.
on their circumstances,
Yeah.
and it seemed more functional for them, I guess.
I
So yeah, sorry, what were you saying?
No, no, no. I totally, and what you're saying, I totally agree with. I think that there's been a shift. I agree with the fact that there's been a shift. I've also seen that while women have pursued careers, they've, in many cases, they've also still had the responsibility of coming home and cooking and taking on those. And I certainly have met more men who are stay-at-home men. I don't know how much. I remember saying, was it last week or the other week, that the law can change, but it takes a lot longer for the mentality to change. I think we're
Hmm.
still working towards that. I don't know that we're fully there. And, I certainly think, I went back to Italy after the economy had collapsed in 2008. There was lots of still that disparity, and that was still very much present that I observed. And it takes time, right? And that's the courage to stand and to claim space for yourself when you've had a life where you didn't. That's not a small change, you know. And you mentioned the corridor effect, which I think we might have talked about before, Dylan. Do you remember the corridor effect?
Oh
No?
yeah, yeah, but yeah,
Yeah.
go ahead.
I
The
love that
like you
concept.
open the one door, yeah.
You really walk into the corridor. And I think people, when they think of change, they get overwhelmed. They think, oh my God, it's so much. And, you know, everything you've mentioned, fitness and meditation. And I know you go for morning walks. You have rituals in place. You do your work with oils. You monitor your boundaries. You do reading. That would overwhelm someone hearing that, going, oh my God, that's like monumental major changes. But I think you made a point where you didn't make all those changes in a day.
Gosh, no.
It was a process of moving in that direction. And it started with one change. And once the corridor effect is essentially, if you want something in your life, take the step in the door. Don't worry about how big it is. Just walk into the corridor. Once you're in the corridor, things start to open up for you. Many other doors start to show up. And I'm assuming when you mentioned it, that's what kind of happened for you. It wasn't like suddenly all she's meditating
That's
and
right.
exercising.
Ta-da! New
Yeah,
me.
yeah. Hurrah, like
Right?
No, and the other thing that I'd like to say on that too is that have grace with yourself. Don't it's not perfection. When I first started going to work out at the gym, I could just say my endurance level, my strength, my balance, all of that. I mean, I'm sure I looked pretty ridiculous, but I didn't care. And I just you keep going. You learn. It's just like anything, a habit, a new skill. You're not expected to know all this stuff and be perfect, but just keep going. And I think I always come back to one of the reasons that has made me commit so strongly in this area is knowing the reason why I'm doing it.
Yeah.
And the reason why I'm doing it, it's sure not to fit into a certain size. It's not to impress anybody else. It's for the value for the person who I am choosing to be ultimately responsible for and love to the best ability. And that is myself.
I love that. Thank you, Sandra. Yeah. And so you've gotten to the place of challenging. And one day what I would like, because I think it's so the beliefs we carry, like it's selfish to think of myself. I'm I'm a bad person if I'm taking care of myself. I think those are hard ones to break, and especially if you've been brought up with that kind of mentality. And so I'm assuming that it's through the process as you started examining things with therapy and reading, and that you came to an insight that this is not me being selfish. This is me taking care. And I honestly believe that if you want to be vibrant in life and you want to be your best version of yourself, that it requires self-care. And it doesn't mean you don't give. It just means that you're filling the pot first, and you're not running on empty, so that you're ensuring yourself is being able to be present, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I'm continually challenging myself on is to make sure that through my show and what I do, that I do let people know both sides of the equation and share more of the times when I'm not out there going to the gym and being amazing. Because after after I have a day, if I go to the gym and I go grocery shopping and I cook a meal and I clean the bathroom or whatever, the next day it's a rest day.
Yeah.
Like and I used to struggle with a little bit of not so much guilt, but not wanting letting people know that I'm not
Yeah.
out there
Yeah.
achieving every single day,
Absolutely.
but accepting it first for myself, knowing that of course that's okay, and sharing that with others too, and letting them know that that's part and parcel of having a chronic condition.
Which is so wonderful because it humanizes the whole experience. And knowing that, whenever I've tried to give someone an idea of the trajectory of recovering through something, I've always said it's not a straight line. You're not just going up and up and up and then becoming more and more magnificent, even though that sounds wonderful. That often, as we're on the journey, to include the times where we slip, we fall off, and we need to sort of reorient and get our footing again. And
That's where we learn and grow.
that's where we learn.
If everything is going, then I actually don't think that's certainly not the life that I would want. I've learned to. I'm a problem solver. Give me a challenge. Let me see what I can do with that.
I've definitely seen that in you. You're fierce. But, I don't know if there's something else. I think that's an amazing story, Sandra, because I've certainly been witness to the changes. And I have a lot of respect and admiration because I do know how easy it is to stay. And we get in our comfortable uncomfortable bubble. It's an uncomfortable bubble that feels familiar and becomes our story, and that feels immutable. And for me, it's always, we got to get past the I'm too old, I'm too this, I'm too that, and move on to what can you do, and look for role models. And I think what's great is you are, in essence, a role model for someone who's had chronic pain. We're not talking about perfection. We're talking about you're always striving to stay as healthy and in the best well-being as you can, and you're taking care of yourself. So I think that's a wonderful role that you're playing, because that's going to help people. And I wonder if there's anything you want to leave us with as we close off today.
Well, just that if I am a role model or an example for others, that is super rewarding, and that's very humbling. And it's something that means the world to me, to be able to have someone hear something that I say, or to see a change that I've made, and for it to spark something, for them to even just be curious, even just think if it might be possible. So much of it is our mindset and how we approach things. And I think that there's just about every area of your life where you can tweak and you can make improvements, but you have to want it.
Yes.
And value yourself and know that you are absolutely worth it, and reach for it, and you'll be amazed what can happen.
No matter what your circumstance.
Absolutely.
And maybe a good starting point is reach out to people. And certainly if you are someone who's struggling with chronic pain and has experienced yourself sort of confined in your life by it, perhaps tuning into your show would be a good start, which is Chronically Driven.
Yeah, Chronically Driven. It's wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts,
Yes.
Spotify or Anchor or wherever that is. And I'm also on Instagram, Chronically Driven as well. That's my favorite platform.
Nice.
Developing the same under YouTube. And over on Facebook, I'm at Chronic Wellness Essentials.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And Dylan, any final comments you want to add?
I think one of the best tools that Sandra mentioned that's worked for me in my life is really looking at the things that are in your control and that are not.
Yes.
And because it's so easy to be upset about politics and about, COVID and all of these external things. And even when you guys mention, it's so hard to take care of yourself, and sometimes you feel guilty, but ultimately that's the only thing that you do have control of.
Yeah.
So try to get control of it, I guess. And it's awesome to hear a story with someone who has. So thank you so much, Sandra, for sharing that with us.
Well, thanks, Dylan. Thanks for being part of the conversation.
Yeah, thank you, Dylan. I always love your insights, and maybe one day we'll talk a little bit more about some of the changes you made, because I know you've made some big changes in your life, right?
We'll see. Yeah.
We'll give that time. But Sandra, it's been so great to have you, and I've known you for a while, and it's been a pleasure sort of watching this whole journey as you've been on it. And certainly maybe we'll have you again sometime to talk some more if you like. And
I'd love that.
so
Thanks
you
for having me here today.
And until next time, take good care. Wonderful. And I want to wish everyone tuning in, or do we say tuning in at this point? I don't even know. But wish you a wonderful morning, evening, afternoon, whatever day it might be. And here's to your well-being and putting yourself first, setting up those boundaries, and taking good care of yourself. All the best.